challenging the credibility of the 2013 electoral process. Based primarily on evidence related to voter registration and the counting and tallying process, AfriCOG argued that the electoral process did not meet constitutional requirements, that the election be free, fair, and transparent. Today, AfriCOG is launching 2 reports, one on voter registration and one on election day and counting and tallying, which give the public access to AfriCOG analysis used in the Supreme Court petition, as well as analysis conducted over the last year. We present this evidence now to remind the public about important and still pending questions related to the election, and to emphasize the importance of resolving these issues before the next election. Electoral legitimacy in Kenya depends on the successful resolution of the questions I'm about to talk about. The main findings are as follows. With regard to voter registration, first, access to voter registration was unequal. In some areas, registration centers were burdened with far more potential voters per center than in other areas. For instance, we found that in Nairobi, there were, on average, 9,396 potential voters per center, whereas in Tharaka-Nithi, there were only 299 potential voters, on average, assigned per center. This led to significant disparities in the percentage of eligible voters who were able to register around the country. This problem was then compounded by the fact that BVR kits had to be shared in some areas of the country, which delayed the process of voter registration and also made it much more difficult to extract clean data from those BVR kits. Second, there were multiple registers in circulation during the election, and it is unclear which ones were used, by whom, and with what justification. So in the next slide, I've laid out the different registers that were in use. Go ahead, Noel. So you see the provisional register was published in December 2012, and it contained 14,340,036 registered voters. In February, the principal register was published, and you can see the different totals. On March 2nd, the IEBC published on its website a list of 36,236 voters without biometric information. Until this point, we hadn't heard of any such list. On March 3rd, political parties were given yet another register to use in their own observation of the elections, and this contained yet another total. Then on March 9th, when the IEBC announced the results of the presidential election, their number of registered voters was again different. And notably, on this release, if you look at the total number recorded on the bottom of the form showing the total number of registered voters in Kenya, that's what I've written there. But if you go ahead and do the math yourself and add up all the numbers per constituency, you'll find that it's a different number from what's actually at the bottom. Then on July 18th, when the IEBC announced the results for the other elected offices, it released yet another number, and then finally we have the Green Book, which the IEBC says is the final register, but we don't know how many registered voters are in there. It's important to also note that the principal register is bigger than the provisional register. So even though registration legally closed on December 18th, there are more registered voters in February than there were in December. Also, which I'll get to in a few minutes, there were important patterns to the changes in the register between December and February, and those questions regarding those patterns haven't been answered yet. So these differing totals have still not been explained satisfactorily by the IEBC. The explanations it has given so far are 3 in number. Noel, if you go ahead. The first is that the principal register is the sum total of the provisional, the special, and 12 trainees that it couldn't include because of administrative reasons. But if you add those numbers together, it doesn't equal what the principal register contained. Second, they said during the Supreme Court petition that actually the reason why the numbers are different is because some voters were accidentally assigned to the wrong polling stations during the process, and so when they compiled the final register, they had to reassign them to the right polling stations. Now, while that would account for the internal changes, it doesn't account for why there was a net growth in the register overall. So that actually doesn't answer the question. And the third thing they said is that, well, actually, after the principal register had already been published, we went back and we looked and we realized that some voters whose names were in the Green Book didn't actually make it to the principal register. But they haven't told us how many of those names there were, where they came from, how they added them back in after the gazettement of the principal register. And it also doesn't explain why things like the names from the special register weren't included in the principal register. The special register was compiled during voter registration. So they had those names and numbers as they were compiling the principal register, and yet they weren't added in. None of those things have been explained yet. It's also important to remember that it's highly problematic to use a handwritten collection of notebooks, which is what the Green Book is, as your final register. The Kriegler Commission, in the aftermath of the 2007 election, castigated the similar black books and actually recommended that those black books be destroyed. And here we are in 2013 using the same exact system, except it's green instead of being black. The 2013 election was also the most expensive election in the world. It cost more than $20 per person to administer this election, compared to, say, 70 cents per person in Ghana, or between $1 and $3 in more established democracies per person. So we spent approximately $293 million on this election, but our voter register is a bunch of notebooks with handwritten notes inside. That is completely unacceptable, and it hasn't been explained. These problems with the register and the multiplicity of registers is also not just theoretical. AfriCOG commissioned a post-election poll in May of 2013, and what we found was that across the country, 16% of respondents said that they knew people who had registered to vote successfully, but were not able to vote on election day because their names were missing from the register. This goes up to 35% in the coast. More than a third of voters in the coast couldn't vote on election day, even though they were registered. 10% nationally said that they personally had their names missing from the register. This went up to 18% in Northeastern Province. Nationally, 8% saw voters whose names were not in the register being allowed to vote, and this went up to 16% in the Northeast. The different numbers are also problematic because, like I said, there appears to be a geographical pattern in terms of the distribution of changes between December and February. Sorry, one up. Keep going. No, that's good. Just keep going. Good. Sorry. Here we go. So you see in places like Rift Valley and Central together, more than 68,000 voters were added to the list after December. Nyanza, 15,000 were taken away. Nairobi, 50,000 taken away between December and February, with no explanation. In its judgment, the Supreme Court authorized the use of multiple registers, but it also specified that those registers were supposed to correspond to the various electoral units. So you were supposed to have, for instance, a register that was for your ward or your constituency or your county, and then when you put all of those together, it was supposed to equal what was in the principal register. But the registers that we're talking about here do not correspond to those electoral units at all. They're completely different and complete registers, and therefore they don't comply with what the Supreme Court judgment actually said. The lack of a verifiable register also makes it very difficult to track turnout. Going by the court-ordered scrutiny of the 22 polling stations that were singled out for retally, we found that between 16 and 18 of those polling stations showed over 100% turnout. AfriCOG agents who were in the general scrutiny room noted at least 10 other forms showing over 100% turnout. We also saw evidence of deliberately manipulated forms, which suggests that cases of illegal turnout were changed to make them appear legal. Go ahead. So here you see that it says that the total number of registered voters for this polling station is 166. But if you look closely, you can see that there was a number underneath that. So it was 120 something. And this was changed. Clearly it was changed. There's no authorizing signature okaying that change. And then the total number of votes cast is 149. So obviously, if you had 166 registered voters, 149 votes cast is okay. But if you only had 120 some assigned to this polling station, then 149 votes cast is over 100% turnout. Go ahead, go down. Keep going, yeah. So the presiding officer here said that she or he noted this and said to the returning officer, this is a problem. But the returning officer said, oh, it's okay because they're registered at the constituency level, which actually makes no sense. You're not registered at one level and not at the other. So we found lots of evidence, lots of other forms with similar problems, and none of these have been addressed. If we use just the cases of over 100% turnout that we noted personally in the judicial retally, we're talking about approximately 9,000 questionable votes cast, which should have been canceled from those polling stations. This is extremely significant, given that the president passed the 50% threshold by only 8,419 votes. How did the IEBC deal with over 100% turnout? We have gotten so far no answers on this. With regard to election day, AfriCOG also noted a wide variety of irregularities at the polling station, which are detailed in the report. We also noted many problems and errors with Forms 34, which were the tallying forms used at polling stream level, and Form 36, which was the form used to amalgamate constituency results. Questions related to these forms remain unanswered. For instance, how were differences in votes reported on Forms 34 and Forms 36 resolved? So here I've just given you a snapshot of some of the things we saw. So you can see that there were differences in Form 34 and Form 36 per constituency for candidates. So the numbers in some cases are quite significant, in some cases they're minor, but the point is that we have no idea how it was decided which one was valid and which one wasn't. The Mars group did an audit of all available forms and found that 2,585 Forms 34 are still missing from the public record. How were results announced without all forms? This is something that we asked in the Supreme Court, and we're still asking. We don't know how the results were announced if all the forms weren't there. It's also unclear how the IEBC handled problems on forms such as the numbers on the forms themselves not adding up, differences in the numerical entry and the same entry written out in words, unsigned forms, blank forms, numbers changed without a signature, there were many, many of those, illegible numbers, and non-identical copies of the same form. So in some areas, we have the exact same polling station form, both signed, with different results. No idea how they handled situations like that. The failure of technology is also detailed in the report. The most important implication of that is that there was no way to check the manual systems, which puts us right back where we were in 2007 and makes it impossible to have a verifiable electoral process. Our analysis of the electronic results transmission system data showed differences between what was transmitted before the system crashed and what was actually recorded on the Form 34. Now, if we had a complete record, we would actually be able to go back to those polling stations that show differences between what was written down and what that presiding officer transmitted. And that would allow us to locate the source of the problem and try and resolve why there were differences. That was the entire point of having that check. Without clarity on questions like this, the IEBC risks losing public faith, which could in the long term negatively impact the legitimacy of the government itself. Kenyans also need answers to these questions so that they can interact with their own electoral process, make their own conclusions about the credibility of their elections. so many pending questions means this electoral process is absolutely unverifiable. Without answers, we can't understand our own elections, and we're completely unprepared for the next one. Going forward, AfriCOG recommends to the IEBC that in terms of this election, the IEBC should explain how the register was compiled, including inconsistencies in the various totals. It should explain how it dealt with over 100% turnout. It should release all missing forms and explain how it announced a presidential result without all the forms in the first place. Explain inconsistencies between Form 34 and Form 36, and once and for all, eliminate the green book. For the future, we recommend better training for the use of technology, better testing of technology, a clear public explanation of the rules regarding the register and voting so that everybody knows what should happen when their name is missing from the register and how to go about correcting that. All Forms 34 should be posted visibly on the outside of polling stations, as is in the law right now. The IEBC needs to explain how the ERT system will transmit the results, how those results will be collected, and who has access to that system. Ensure that only formatted and serialized forms are given out, and that there's a traceable chain of command on those who have authority to handle those forms. And finally, we recommend that they make sure that those forms are available to the public in an efficient and easy manner.